Okay, welcome to Lesson 2 of the Digital Drawing Fundamentals course. In this session, we're going to be discussing primary tools that we're going to be using for this class. First and foremost, let's talk about Photoshop. Now, I am running here Photoshop CS6. Photoshop CS6 introduced several new capabilities to the drawing and painting system that we're going to be taking advantage of in this class. So if you can get a version of CS6 to use, you'll be able to keep up with the coursework much easier than if you're using a previous version. That's not to say previous versions won't work, because they will. And we'll talk slightly about how to make use of some of those older ones, but the primary focus of the course is going to be using some of the newer tools that are found in Photoshop CS6. Now, when you open Photoshop, chances are you will be looking at the default workspace that comes packaged and installed with the program, otherwise known as the Essentials workspace. That's not the most productive one for drawing. I'm going to recommend that you change to the Painting workspace, and we'll even further customize and configure this to our needs as we work through the course. But this one starts out a lot closer to what we'll need in order to access the tools that we're going to be using most. Now, before we begin any actual drawing, I do want to talk a little bit about the input device that's being used, as in mouse or tablet. Chances are there's many students who will attempt to do a drawing course using a mouse to draw, and it's entirely possible if you're capable of doing that, but my recommendation is to use something else. I recommend a pressure-sensitive tablet. This is known as just a graphics tablet. There's several different types of manufacturers. I happen to use the Wacom brand here, and I can recommend that. It's worked really well for me. In no way am I attempting to sell one type or another. I can simply recommend this through my own experience, but I am saying this input device is far superior to a mouse when it comes to drawing. If you're wondering why that is, allow me to try to demonstrate a little bit to you. Now, my brush tool setup is a standard regular brush. It's kind of a soft edge there. And now with my mouse, I'm just going to click and drag, which is generally how you would draw with a mouse. Click and drag, and we get this soft, thick line as you would expect it. That's because a mouse has one level of input, as in the button is down. And then you have direction, of course, which is based on where you move the mouse, but as far as inputting on the brush, there's only one level of pressure, that is on or off. Now, I'm switching over to my tablet, and this has several, as in 2048 levels of pressure sensitivity. So you can be really light or you can go really dark. And this is a much more natural form of drawing, and it produces a much more appealing line to the eye, because visually we're used to looking for lines that are not quite so mechanical and consistent, such as what you see here with the mouse. This looks a lot closer to the more traditional drawing that we would expect to see with an actual pencil on a piece of actual paper. So let's look a little bit into how that works, and to what Photoshop is doing in order for us to make this happen. We'll open up the brushes panel. You can see at the bottom here, this stroke preview from the brush is showing a sharpened edge. That usually indicates that there is some sort of pressure sensitivity happening there. If we click on the shape dynamics, we can see under the size, the control of the size of the brush tip is done by the pressure of the pen. If you turn this off, it turns into more of what we expect with the mouse. So these settings allow the pen to control the appearance of that brush tip. And there's several of these in here. The angle can be controlled by pen tilt or pressure. The roundness can also be controlled by the pen pressure. If we go to the transfer, we can get the opacity and the flow, also controlled by pen pressure. And in that sense, you create a much more realistic way of drawing. So if we scribble very lightly, we get some very faint pencil strokes, I should say. And if we push down really hard, we get some much harder and harsher, and we can vary it in between. Now with Photoshop CS6, Adobe did introduce some new features that makes drawing even more fun in Photoshop. It makes the drawing tools feel even more realistic and caters to a more traditional mindset. Let's explore some of those, but first I'm going to throw away this layer that we've been playing with and add a new one. I'm going to pull out this brush's preset panel and start scrolling down. Now, with CS6, they introduced something new, and that is known as erodible tips. And those are seen by this small sort of charcoal pencil looking icon. Let's pick this one. Now, the way these work is the tip will wear down according to the pressure that's placed on it. And you can see in the preview there, the more I scribble with this nub, it tends to wear down so it's no longer sharp. And that creates a different type of drawing surface than it was before. Instead of seeing a nice thin sharp line, we get a broader, heavier stroke instead of a sharp thin one. Once again, this is just a way for Photoshop to digitally simulate a more traditional type of drawing implement. So the question may then come, well, what do I do with my dull crayon here? Well, we sharpen it, and that's through the brush panel. If we go up to the brush tip shape, and we have an erodible point selected, there's this button called Sharpen Tip. Click it, and it sharpens up that tip again, so we can once again use that very tip to create a thin, sharp, pointed line. Now, I personally find it tedious to have this brush panel constantly open so I can hit that Sharpen Tip button. And what I've done is mapped this function to a hotkey. And that's done by going to Edit, Keyboard Shortcuts. And if you look in the Tools and scroll all the way down, you get Sharpen Erodible Tips. Now, the problem with assigning your own keyboard shortcut is that Photoshop already uses all the best ones. So you usually have to sacrifice one in order to get another. Now, this is Sharpen Erodible Tips. I want to use the letter S. S is already in use by the Clone Stamp tool and the Pattern Stamp tool. Because this is going to be a drawing course and I don't tend to use the Clone Stamp tool that often when drawing, I'm going to be okay with that. So I'm going to accept and go to Conflict and have the Clone Stamp tool is cleared out so that there's no keyboard shortcut for that now. I'll hit accept and click OK. And now to test it out, we've got our drawing tool here. Let's go ahead and make that tip dull just by scribbling up real hard. Tap the S key and it sharpens it up for us. Very nice. That way we don't always have to have this brush panel open. So we can collapse that down. The brush presets, I'll put back in here. Well, actually, let's reset the painting. So the brush preset was already there. I'm closing the swatches panel because I also want to add another panel over there to it. Along the top here is known as the options bar for whatever tool you're currently using. Over on the far left contains the tool presets that come shipped with Photoshop or if you add your own custom ones. If you open up the little gear icon, you can actually load some tool presets. Or if you look down even further, there's a bunch of pre-packaged ones that aren't loaded, like the pencil brushes, which are particularly helpful for a drawing course. Photoshop warns us that we're going to replace the current tool presets. Let's just go ahead and append those. We'll open this up. Now we got lots of fun new presets to play with. If you're familiar with drawing, with traditional drawing, these will look familiar to you. The 2B pencil, the HB pencil, the 2H pencil, these are all grades of lead or graphite, so to speak. For instance, the 2H pencil is a very light, almost a sketch-worthy pencil to draw with. And then the 9B pencil is very dark. So I find the small library of presets that already come included are very handy, and we'll be using these a lot throughout the course. So I'm going to take this Tool Presets panel and I'm going to pop it in my workspace right there, so I can easily grab these whenever I wish to have them. Another handy feature to use while drawing, especially with a graphics tablet, is the Rotate View tool. That's found underneath the Hand tool, the Rotate View tool, or by tapping the R key. What this does is allows you to sort of spin the canvas around so it's easier to draw in certain areas. Now I'm right-handed, so my strokes always tend to go in this direction or maybe this direction. It's difficult for me to sort of push the pencil over. That's where the rotate tool comes in handy. If you hold down the R key and spin it around, it's almost like moving your piece of paper around on the table. So you can get a better access and sort of get a better angle in certain areas. To reset the view, hold down that R key again and hit Reset View. So that covers most of the features in Photoshop that we're going to be working with during this course. Now the majority of the coursework will take place here in Photoshop, but there is a few things that we will end up doing in another tool, and that would be Illustrator. And mostly what I want to address is that even though it is a vector-based software, it can still use the pressure-sensitive tablet. So here we have the brush selected, and we'll open up the brush options. I've got the standard 5-point round brush, but I've got the size set to pressure instead of fixed as it normally is, and the variation set to 5 points. That's the upper limit of change that is permitted according to pressure. Now I'm going to just very quickly sketch out a piece of fruit. And as I add more pressure to the line, the stroke becomes thicker. As I brush lightly, it's a very thin stroke. Now the advantage in Illustrator is that these strokes, as I mentioned, they are completely vectorized. So it's easy to go in and manipulate them as points on those curves. And so then we have our piece of fruit that doesn't really look all that great, but it was just a quick demonstration of how the different tools that we're going to be using in this course can be used with pressure sensitivity. So that brings Lesson 2 to a close. We've gone over the different tools that we're going to be using in the remainder of the course and shown how to use the pressure-sensitive tablet in each of them. The next session, we'll begin the building blocks of drawing, and we'll start with drawing technique. See you then.